So today we celebrate the feast of St. Bartholomew, which means Bar is son of and Ptolemy. So he's the son of Ptolemy. Maybe that's like his last name, and his first name is Nathaniel. Tradition kind of connects them together. We're not exactly sure though. But that's why we have this reading from John about Nathaniel, because really we don't know anything about Bartholomew from any of the other Gospels. Philip comes to him and says, "We found the one. We found him." And he says, "Wait, can anything good come from Nazareth?" And as Jesus said to the first disciples that were following him, Philip says, "Come and become one who sees." Come and become one who sees. And I think about this, a lot of times we feel like we have to come up with answers to all the problems people have, all the objections they have to Jesus or the Catholic Church, and the reality is we only have to say to them, "Come. Come and become one who sees. Experience for yourself." But as I was praying through this, there's a couple things that connected in my head was the whole word Israel. Jesus says to Nathanael, "Here is a true child of Israel." Now, Israel, of course, being Jacob. Jacob, when he wrestled with God, had his name changed to Israel. And he says, "Well, how do you know me?" And he said, "I saw you under the fig tree." And he says, "Oh, you are the king of Israel. You're my king." And then at the end, Jesus says, you say that because I said, I saw you under the fig tree? You'll see greater things than this, that the heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. You will see this. As who did in the Old Testament? Jacob, Israel. He saw this happening, coming down, and he saw this stairway or ladder towards heaven, where the angels were coming up and down on that place, and he says, "This is the temple of God. This is a place of the dwelling place of God." And so we see this whole connection that he's connected to Israel. And yet Jesus says, this man has no duplicity in him. Which is a little interesting because Jacob, Israel, had lots of duplicity in him, right? He tricked his father, tricked his brother, did all sorts of things. He had to grow and step away from that. But I think an important piece of all that is something I referenced earlier, that Israel wrestled with God. He wrestled with God. And I see Nathanael, maybe as he was under the fig tree, he was wrestling with God. If you've watched The Chosen, you see that scene, and he is wrestling with God in that moment under the fig tree. Not in a physical wrestling as Jacob was, but an internal wrestling. We say, do we wrestle with God? I think maybe, as I was praying through this and thinking about all this, I was thinking, maybe we're too polite with God. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be reverent. I'm not saying we shouldn't be pious. I'm not saying that we should wrestle with God out loud here as part of Mass. But in our personal prayer time, are we too polite with God? That we have duplicity, where we try to pretend there's nothing going on and we put a good face on towards God. God would rather that we wrestle with Him. That when we struggle, when we're having internal problems and saying, I don't get this, God. Why are you allowing this to happen? That instead of saying, oh, well, I'm sure everything's fine, but internally we're really fuming. Because God sees the internal fuming. He sees that we're trying to trick Him and trick ourselves. I think maybe we're too polite with God in our prayer. Not that we be rude, of course, but to be like Jacob, to wrestle with God. I'm struggling here, Lord. help me. And in that encounter, in that wrestling with Almighty God, it allows Him then to strengthen us, to draw us through, and to have an intimate relationship with Him. That we come to know Him more. Because in that, in not allowing that duplicity there and to wrestling with God, we allow God then to see our hearts. We take down the barriers and we say, okay, you can see the pain that I'm in. You can see the suffering that I'm in. You can see the struggling that I'm in. Lord, why? Not a why as a challenging, but why as I need to know you, Lord. May we be like Nathanael, without duplicity. And when we need to, may we wrestle with God under our fig trees, so that we can come and become one who sees.